It's the weekend and you have financial questions that need answering. That can only mean one thing. It's time for Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome, welcome. Happy New Year. It's the Jill on Money show. This is the program that takes the mystery out of your financial life. I'm Jill Schlesinger. Mark's running the show. And this weekend, we are so honored because we have got a great interview. Scott Galloway, remember, he's been on the program before. He's written a new book called Post-Corona, From Crisis to Opportunity. He's a professor at NYU, and he's a serial entrepreneur, and he's a great guest. I want to remind you, we are broadcasting from the Capital One Bank virtual studios. Capital One, this is Banking Reimagined. What's in your wallet? Okay, let's get into this interview with Scott Galloway. Here we go. Hang on, gang. So, Scott, you've got a new book. Congratulations. It's called Post-Corona, From Crisis to Opportunity. And I think it's such a great time for you to be on the program with us because we last checked in with you in the springtime. And I want to thank you so much because that was the interview that really helped me frame a lot of the stuff that I was doing on CBS News. I always cited you and said, COVID is an accelerant. And I want you to now reflect, since we spoke, which I believe was in April, how you think that thesis of yours has played out many months later.
Simply put, I think I was right. I was trying to think of a less pretentious way of saying that. So if you look at e-commerce, in 8 weeks, loosely speaking, e-commerce grew 1% a year, meaning each year another percentage of total retail was transacted through digital channels. And sitting here at the beginning of the pandemic when we first spoke, e-commerce was 18% of all retail, and within 8 weeks, it was 28%. So we literally had a decade of acceleration in e-commerce in just 8 weeks. And we've seen this across online grocery. We've also seen really unfortunate trends accelerate, whether it's income inequality or the fact that we now have more young adults between the ages of 18 and 30 living at home than living on their own. So both good and bad, best of times, worst of times, but everything's been accelerated. If
you go back in time and to the point where you were writing this book, what was something you thought was happening in the springtime that didn't pan out?
That's a really interesting quote. I think we thought that the markets would go down. I think we thought that, okay, it's a pandemic that probably will register in most crises, economic or a terrorist attack, we see the markets take a hit. This did take a very short-term, very violent hit, but the markets, no one would have guessed that the worst crisis in American history as it relates to the velocity of death we're registering would result in markets hitting all-time highs and real estate values hitting all-time highs. I wouldn't have expected that.
And of course, you write about this, but the thing that became so clear was that this was a virus of haves and have-nots. Talk a little bit about the inequality and the gap that's blown out since that springtime period.
Well, I think there's a very cynical view, and I hold this view, but it doesn't mean we're wrong, that this pandemic has provided cloud cover for our elected representatives who are influenced by what I'll call the shareholder class to take the top 10% and shove them into the 1%. You have assets at all-time highs, as we referenced. The NASDAQ and real estate prices are at all-time highs, but 80% of those assets by dollar volume are owned by the top 10%, some would argue owned by the top 1%. So the thing that's uncomfortable to say out loud is that if you're in the top 10%, you're living your best life. If you've been blessed with good health, you are spending more time with your children, spending more time with Netflix, and you've never been wealthier. And you're spending less time commuting. If you're in the other 90%, you have found that things have gotten harder. So this has been, you make over $100,000 a year, no change in employment. 60% of those people can work from home. You make less than $40,000 a year. 40% have had job interruption and less than 10% can work from home. So we've gone from a dysfunctional economy to a dystopian one.
And it's really startling because, I can look at headlines. This is from USA Today. The top 1% saw their wages soar by 160% since 1979, 6 times the increase of the bottom 90% of workers. What does that mean for this economy? How do we progress if we only have the tippy top advancing?
Well, I don't think we do, and you use the right word. We've registered incredible prosperity, but very little progress. All the value creation in World War II to 2000 has been added to billionaires' wealth, and at the same time, 1 in 5 households with children are food insecure. A third of renters are worried about being evicted. I think the biggest threat is to what has been the greatest source of prosperity in history, and that is capitalism. And capitalism is not an organic, natural state if it doesn't rest on a pool of empathy. In sum, capitalism is you allow full body contact, violence, Darwinism at a corporate level. You let Apple put companies out of business. You let Apple almost go out of business. And that prosperity from that Darwinism, that competition, that corporate violence creates such incredible prosperity that we can fund Social Security and take senior poverty from 38% to 11%. We can fund Head Start. Where we appear to have gotten it wrong, in my view, where we've really lost the script, is we've flipped it. And that is we've decided to be generous and loving with corporations and really harsh and Darwinian with individuals. I think our biggest mistake and our biggest failure as a nation is we have decided to protect companies, not people.
This is what you call sort of this idea about empathetic capitalism. And my nephew, who is a huge fan of yours, he writes this question, which comes right on the back of this. He says, Scott, I've heard you say a lot recently about empathetic capitalism. Go back to a system of America where capitalism rests on a pool of empathy. And he wants to know, when was that period? In other words, did it really exist? What were the traits? He says we had a capitalist boom following World War II, lasted 5 decades, but it seems to me it was a boom for white men. Empathy wasn't exactly afforded to women and people of color. So he wants to know, what's the period that you're referencing, and how do we make it happen today?
Sure. So systemically and more broadly speaking, when we had leaders who didn't see red or blue, they saw red, white, and blue, and that is they had all served in the agency of others, usually in uniform. We passed incredible social services legislation. We passed civil rights legislation. We got it wrong on women and people of color, but every day we got it less wrong. And I think it was through prosperity, and we funded incredible, the Great Society through this prosperity, through capitalism. On a personal level, the University of California in the 80s and the 90s showed incredible grace and generosity to the son of a single immigrant parent who lived and died as secretary. And I was able to get undergraduate and graduate degrees from UCLA and Berkeley for a total tuition of $7,000. So that is capitalism. That is saying, okay, we're going to let companies go at it in California, and we're going to use some of that prosperity for progress. We're going to invest in the future. We're not going to borrow money from future generations in the form of debt to cut taxes on the wealthy and then fund incredible stimulus. I mean, effectively, think about what we're doing here, Jill. That is, we've decided that losing people at 3 times the rate that we lost in World War II is bad. But what would be profoundly tragic is if the NASDAQ went down. And so we are borrowing trillions of dollars from future generations such that we don't have to increase taxes on anybody and still flatten the curve for rich people. I think we had much greater examples of capitalism in the 70s and 80s.
We'll get back to our interview with Scott Galloway in just a second. Hey, here's an idea. Go to our website, jillonmoney.com, and you'll see that the podcast is right on the front door. The podcast is called Jill on Money. You can get it on Apple and Stitcher and Spotify. And join us. We do some things that are the same there, but some things that are a little different. And you can get it every single day, and you can listen whenever you want. Okay, check it out. We'll be right back.
Do I invest here? Should I put my money there? Jill Schlesinger can help you. Back to Jill on Money.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. And we are so happy because who's back in the house? Scott Galloway. Prof G, to some of you who may know him that way. Scott Galloway is a serial entrepreneur. He's a podcast host. He is an author. And his most recent book is called Post-Corona, From Crisis to Opportunity. One of the things that we stress in this next part of our interview is that there are some people who start off their careers and their lives with some advantages. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. I've had many advantages, and I'm thankful for those advantages. But in this part of the interview, what Scott is describing is the way that we somehow think that our good luck is actually a talent that we have, a unique characteristic. And it may not be that. It may just be that you're lucky. It may be that you were lucky enough to graduate into an incredibly strong market. It may be that you're unlucky enough to graduate in a really weak labor market or a weak stock market. Here's more of our interview with Scott Galloway. You've been pretty much at the forefront of folks who talk about how so many people who are wealthy seem to conflate the result, their wealth, with their talent. And you say it actually has a lot to do with luck. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The other virus, and probably a more dangerous virus long term in America, is the shareholder class conflating luck with talent. And I was guilty of it. Your nephew talked about how basically our society was kind of the patriarchy. I raised several $100 million through the course of my career for my startups, and 99% went to my demographic, specifically white males. And it seemed natural at the time. There has been, and I thought, I think well into my 40s, that it was a function of my genius, not recognizing that being born a white heterosexual male in 1964 was hitting the lottery. It meant I could get free education from great universities in the 80s. It meant I could come of professional age in the 90s, where you could raise a ton of money for startups and build unprecedented economic value through a decline in processing power. I mean, you want to talk about luck? My freshman roommate was very similar to me. I think we were both talented, both UCLA degrees. God reached into his soul and decided that he was homosexual. At the age of 34, I was raising tens of millions of dollars for e-commerce startups in San Francisco and being invited to Davos. At the age of 34, he died alone of AIDS. So I think a lot of this, much of our success, and I think this is especially true of young men, we need to recognize that it wasn't our fault. And the way we recognize it isn't our fault is to ensure that many of the people in the new generations have the same opportunities we do. And I find, especially across what we call the innovation economy, venture capitalists, startup entrepreneurs, mistake or conflate luck for talent. And I think it's a virus that infects America.
You write in your book, Post Corona, From Crisis to Opportunity, that there is something called the Great Dispersion. Can you explain what is the Great Dispersion and in what areas are we seeing the Great Dispersion? What sectors of the economy?
The biggest trend is acceleration, but the biggest opportunity or paradigm shift for stakeholder creation is this massive dispersion away from traditional channels of distribution of huge industries. So, for example, healthcare, 17% of our economy, a $3 trillion industry. 99% of the people who have contracted, endured, and established antibodies to the novel coronavirus will have never entered a doctor's office, much less a hospital. So while there's still $1 trillion of procedures and surgery that need to take place in hospitals, diagnostics, diagnosis, treatments, $2 trillion of that can probably move to or be dispersed away from the traditional channels, hospitals and doctors' offices, to smartphones, smart speakers in your home. I think it's likely that you'll begin testing. I think Amazon will get into the business of diagnosis, primary health care, and even more aggressive healthcare in your home. So we're going to see the dispersal of trillions of dollars, maybe 25% of our economy, whether it was Amazon dispersing retail to our desktops and our mobile phones and from shelves to warehouses to our front door. You're going to see a dispersal of healthcare. Education is going to disperse from campuses to our phones and our computers. We're going to see a dispersal of media, movie theaters to our flat screen TVs. This dispersion, if you will, creates more economic opportunity than any trends in the last 50 years, other than maybe globalization and the digitization. There's an enormous opportunity here.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's just sort of mind-blowing, actually. Let's move to the idea that really just absolutely captivated me when we spoke back in the spring, and that is the future of higher education. Now, I think this is really fascinating because we have this crazy experiment, talk about an accelerant of online learning, and some successful, not so successful on other parts. I'm wondering, what is the Galloway thesis on higher ed and where it goes post pandemic?
Well, I think higher education is slowly morphed from the greatest upward lubricant of the middle class in America to a caste system, where kids from the top 1% income earning households are 77 times more likely to get into an elite university than the other 99%. And 34 of the 100 highest ranked universities in the US have more students from the top 1% than the bottom 60%. So I think we've literally lost the script and decided, and I'm guilty of this, that we're no longer public servants serving in the agency of others, that we're luxury brands, and that the deans of schools stand up and brag that we rejected 90% of our applicants, which in my view is tantamount to the head of a homeless shelter bragging they turned away 9 in 10 people. Technology and COVID-19 are the fists of stone coming for an industry that's raised its prices faster than healthcare without any underlying increase in innovation. Last night was the last session of my 12-session brand strategy course. I charge the kids $7,000 to take this course. Granted, my agent takes a 98% commission, but that's $1.96 million for 12 nights. That's $166,000 per night that is levied on young people in the form of debt. It results in them getting married later, forming households later. That makes them more risk averse to start businesses. It's morally corrupt, and it's bad for our economy and bad for our society. I think we've lost the script in higher education, and I think that technology offers an incredible opportunity. If we just take 50% of our courses online, it doubles the capacity, and we can take UCLA back from where it is now, 12% admissions rate, to 60% admissions, such that unremarkables can get in. It seems like higher education has decided that their collective goal is to take the top 1% and to turn them into billionaires. And that's not the role of higher ed. The role of higher ed is to give the other 99% a shot at being in the top 1%. We've lost the script. Hopefully technology and COVID-19 are the fists of stone coming for the mother of all chins that have been stuck out. And that's the arrogance and self-aggrandizement of university leadership that thinks we're luxury brands, not public servants.
I'm wondering how you see the nearly $1.6 trillion of student debt. It's in the news, and a lot of people say, oh, let's just get rid of it. How does this idea of outstanding student debt, potential student loan forgiveness, how does this weave its way into the next phase of how we treat higher education? Should we get rid of this debt or not?
This might surprise you. I don't think we should. I think that that effectively through this kind of luxury position in this gestalt in America where everybody needs to get a college education or you failed as a parent has resulted in a transfer of wealth from $1.6 trillion from mostly middle-class households to universities. And I think we have to try and figure out a way that that doesn't continue happening. But I don't think a bailout of student debt is the right course. I don't know what you say to the individual who sacrificed, that didn't buy a house, that didn't go on a cruise with their parents because they wanted to pay off their student loans, who just paid them off. I don't know what you say to that person. I think there needs to be relief if you take jobs in economically strained areas, if you do social service. I think we should figure out a way to use our balance sheet to reduce the interest costs. But typically every major bailout in our nation, whether it's the bailout of long-term credit management or Chrysler, has just led to more moral hazard and bigger bailouts. I think the universities need to come under the financial pressure of not having cheap capital. I think people need to be responsible for their decisions. And I know that sounds harsh. I believe there should be some sort of debt relief, some sort of debt forgiveness. But wiping out $1.6 trillion in debt, it's just going to lead to an increase in costs. It's an increase in moral hazard and bad behavior because people are thinking in the back of their mind, well, maybe at some point I'll just get bailed out. So I'm actually not in favor of debt forgiveness around student debt.
Okay, we'll get back to our interview with Scott Galloway in just a second. If you've got a financial question or you want to comment on some of the things that Scott's saying, I know this aroused comments every time he's on the show. We get a lot of really great emails from you. Send us an email, askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
$401ks, IRAs, refinancing, she covers it all. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's Jill on Money, and we are in the middle of a great interview with Scott Galloway. And Scott's so interesting because, he sort of takes some higher level concepts around finance and marketing and ideas, and he translates them in a way that makes it very accessible to all of us. In this next part of the interview, we are talking about working from home. I can't imagine that we're going to go back to everything was the way it was in the before times, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I just think about this show. This show, Mark and I used to meet at the CBS News Broadcast Center, and it was a total schlep for him to get there from his apartment. And he had to deal with a lot of childcare issues. And, it was okay. Yes, it was fine. It was great. We were in a studio, and Mark has always said that interviews that are conducted live with people physically in the same space are better than those that are not. But then again, here comes the virus, and all of a sudden, we have to adjust. And the adjustment has led us to really different conclusions. And I think that Mark would be surprised to note that a lot of our interviews that we've done that are remote are really good. And maybe there's some aspect of being able to have a little distance from somebody that they can feel comfortable or that they can talk to you in a different way. I don't know. I'm wondering if working from home, if some aspects of this are really going to stick, the post pandemic period, what will change in the future as a result of working from home? Mark and I use this great program to record the podcast. Will that program be the way that we do this in the future? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. And I'm kind of happy doing stuff from home. Here's more of our interview with Scott Galloway. So I want you to talk a little bit about how you see work from home and that trend. What happens to that idea when kids go back to school 5 days a week and when people are sort of used to this idea of, hey, I kind of dig the fact that I can go grocery shopping in the middle of the day and get my work done by the end of the day. So how do those two ideas, working from home and the impact on commercial real estate, where do you see that going post COVID?
One of the largest asset classes in America is commercial real estate, gross dollar value of around $12 trillion. The first building I worked in at Morgan Stanley, 1251 Avenue of the Americas, they track how many people in the building for security reasons. It averaged during the week pre-COVID 8,500 people. It's averaging 500 right now. And once we have a vaccine, it'll absolutely increase, but I don't think it's ever going back to 8,500. If you think about, remember there's all those graphs you used to see of the amount of time people are spending across different mediums, and you'd see that digital was 40% of people's time, but only 10% of advertising. So we knew Google and Facebook were going to boom because over time, money kind of follows time and attention. If 20 to 30% of our time shifts away from commuting and from being in an office, which I think it will, to the home, you're going to see $2 to $3 trillion in value shift from commercial to residential real estate. So it's a terrible time to be an office REIT. It's a terrible time to be a restaurant that serves the lunch crowd. There's a huge ecosystem serving headquarters all over the nation. But you're going to see Williams-Sonoma and restoration hardware stocks hit all-time highs. You're going to see lumber prices hit a new high. You're going to see residential real estate and everything that serves them absolutely boom. There's going to be a dispersion of trillions of dollars from commercial and retail real estate to residential.
It's amazing to consider that. I mean, I guess it's also amazing. Look, I'm a New York City person, so it kind of scares me. So this idea of commercial real estate being under this dramatic pressure, I just saw it in real time. I was back in the city a few weeks ago, walking to my dentist. By the way, there's an industry that really does need to be, I don't know, technology needs to come into dentistry. I don't know what's going on. They like hack at your teeth with metal implements still. But I'm walking Midtown, no one's there. And it freaked me out a little bit because I'm on the Upper West Side. Life seems pretty normal. You walk the dogs in Riverside Park, everything's fine. You go Midtown, it's a ghost town. So what is the future of a place like New York City or, San Francisco or, Boston? How do you see post-corona? Is there opportunity there, or is that the flavor of a city going to change?
I think it's situational. So let's just look at San Francisco, and people expand the trends in San Francisco to the broader kind of macro viewpoint around cities. I think San Francisco, like any consumer product, has just become expensive but bad. I just think it's overpriced and not a great place to live. And you could blame it on civic management or lack of housing, whatever it is. But if you look at economic history, post-pandemic, cities usually thrive. And there is something around bumping off one another. There is something about the serendipity of having people in a crowded, dense place. I'm actually quite bullish on cities. I think that once we have a vaccine, you're going to see people return to the city. The complexion will change. There'll be fewer office buildings, But if New York real estate, where I live in Soho, is $2,500 a square foot. So if it goes to $1,500 a square foot, that's not the worst thing in the world. And Facebook and Amazon and Apple and Google are all doubling down on New York real estate because the most valuable person in any company right now is a double E from Dartmouth and at 25. And she wants to live, at least for a few years, in a city. So I'm actually quite bullish on cities. And what we've decided in this pandemic that's sort of strange is that our collective goal seems to prop up the market such that rich older people stay rich. And what people don't realize is that when there's a destruction in value, there's huge opportunity or a transfer of wealth from older people to younger people, from asset holders to people who are getting assets. The reason I'm economically secure now is that as I was coming into my prime income earning years, after the market crash of 2009, I was able to buy Amazon at half the price it was trading at 2007. So if real estate in Brooklyn and New York and some major cities comes down and stock prices were to come down, that's not a bad thing for young people. That's opportunity. So I think cities still have I think the death of cities, the rumor has been greatly exaggerated. We constantly see cities aggregate more and more wealth, more and more influence, and young people want to be in cities.
Okay, we'll get back to our interview with Scott Galloway in just a minute. And when I'm thinking about some of this work from home stuff, of course, I also understand that many of you don't have the ability to work from home. So if that's the case, I'm sorry to drone on about it, but it is going to be a big deal going forward. Okay, when we return, more with Scott. We're going to talk about IPOs. Kind of cool. Okay, we'll be right back.
Follow Jill on Twitter and Instagram for more personal finance content. Just use the handle @JillOnMoney. Now, back to the show.
You're back. It's Jill on Money, and we are coming to the end of our interview with Scott Galloway, Prof. G. He's a professor at NYU Business School, at Stern School of Business. He's an author. He wrote a book called The Four. That's why he's been on the show previously. His latest book is called Post-Corona: From Crisis to Opportunity. And we happened to be able to interview him during the week when DoorDash went public and Airbnb went public. Now, at the day of the interview itself, Airbnb had not gone public yet. So it was crazy. I mean, that stock soared on its first day and days of trading. But you'll hear Scott talk about Airbnb as more of an ongoing business and what it means and why he believes it is going to be a game changer in the whole hotel industry and the hospitality and travel industry. Here is more of our interview with Scott Galloway. Talking to you in a week where we're going to get some unicorn IPOs. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about one that has happened and one that will happen, which is Airbnb. By the time this airs, Airbnb will already be public. So let's start with Airbnb.
I'm very bullish on Airbnb. If you think I think Airbnb is the strongest brand as we sit here now in the history of travel and hospitality. People love Singapore Airlines. It's not relevant to most people. People like Four Seasons, but it's only relevant to luxury consumers. If you do a search for key terms or look at key term search volume and you type in any major city and then you put a suffix on Hilton, Orlando Holiday Inn, Orlando Four Seasons, and then Orlando Airbnb, the number of searches for that city in Airbnb is greater than the rest combined. So Airbnb is already the strongest brand in hospitality globally. I think COVID plays to their strengths. I think people want better value. If you travel with a family, renting a 2-bedroom apartment is much more economically viable. It also has the mother of all moats, and that is you and I could start a ride-hailing company in the Hamptons with 10 or 20 million. We could create local demand, people who want rides. We could create local supply, drivers. What you can't create, though, with 20 million or even $1 billion at this point is a apartment sharing or rental firm, because while you need local supply, you need global demand, because 95% of the people renting a home in Southampton will be from different corners of the earth. And Airbnb has more people on their platform now than the population of California, 40 million. It has 7 million rental units, greater than the top 5 hotels combined, and 4 million hosts, most of whom are women in their 30s who make a good living. I don't think it's arbitraging people's human capital like an Uber or a DoorDash and circumventing minimum wage laws with software. So simply put, I think this company is a juggernaut that's going public despite a pandemic, whereas a company like DoorDash is going public because of a pandemic, because of the surge in home delivery and food. So the question is, which company does better when the vaccine is here? So I think Airbnb is a juggernaut. I think DoorDash is experiencing a sugar high from the increase in deliveries. I think Airbnb is arguably going to be one of the most successful companies to go public in a long time. I'm obviously very bullish.
All right. Now, I want to end with our joint love of the hated industry of financial services. So I want to talk about some of the quote unquote innovation in financial services. You write extensively and you've spoken about the dangers of Robinhood. Can you talk a little bit about why you believe this is a very dangerous app for those who are using it in terms of their entree into investing?
Well, if you look back on Facebook, what Facebook figured out was a way to kind of go down the brain stem, if you will, and figure out that things like endless scroll, affirmation via like, created addictive components, gamifying such that young men and women were spending too much time on the app. We've seen an explosion in self-harm, an explosion in suicide, especially among young girls, because they no longer have to endure not getting invited to a party, but they see it play out in real time alone on their phone in their room. And these companies appear to have absolutely prioritized shareholder value over the health of our young people or our commonwealth. Their platforms have been weaponized by bad actors who pervert our elections. They don't seem to really care about anti-competitive behavior. What if we could go back in time and say, all right, this company is a menace. We need to put in place regulation. I think that's where we are right now with Robinhood. And that is, I think there's a lot of young men who are at home, bored in their parents' basement. They get a stimulus check and they put it into the market. And instead of trading or even investing, they are basically gambling. And if you look at the addictive gamification, random rewards, and visual cues of Robinhood, it is very similar to a slot machine or a casino. And I think it's resulting in a cohort of young men that are becoming addicted, aren't learning about investing, aren't even learning about trading, but they're gambling. The result is that the story stocks that get talked about on CNBC are skyrocketing. Tesla's now worth more than the other 3 biggest automobile companies combined. But I don't think this story ends well. So the question is, if we had young men and women getting addicted to a company's product that didn't really seem to have much regard for their well-being, would we do something about it? I think that's where we are right now with Robinhood. I think if we could have, we would have intervened on Facebook earlier. I think we're at that moment right now with Robinhood. I would describe Robinhood joins Facebook and Uber as part of the menace economy, and that is, it is arbitraging people's addiction to increase shareholder value.
Okay, when we return, we are going to finish up our interview with Scott Galloway. And boy, this is going to really start to make people nuts, because at the very end of the interview, we're talking, what is the value of business school? Okay, we'll be right back. You're back. It's Jill on Money. And what is exactly that MBA worth? Here's more of our interview with Scott Galloway. He'll tell us. So last question from Nephew Douglas, a 26-year-old working at a boutique management consulting firm in NYC without a clear 5-year plan, who is considering business school. What is the value of graduate business school for my nephew? He wants to know.
It's a great question, and it's situational. There's some nuance here. I would ask Douglas a few questions. versus what are his opportunity costs? Is he at a place where he's killing it? He has senior level sponsorship. His income is accelerating. Because a lot of times people grow up thinking, I have to go to graduate school. My parents went to graduate school. That's just a standard box I need to check. And what I say to a lot of people is keep in mind, when you leave, we're going to recruit and replace you with someone who's coming out of business school. So if you're using it as a means to get ahead, you're already there. So it's opportunity cost. If he doesn't like what he's doing and he doesn't know what he wants to do, and he has the money, this is so expensive now, and he can get into a top 20 school. Quite frankly, I don't think you should go to business school unless you go to a top 20 school. It's too damn expensive. You're paying a Mercedes price tag for a Hyundai price. So if you're going to pay a Mercedes price tag, it's $160,000 in tuition and board to go to NYU, you need to get the Mercedes. So it's situational. His opportunity costs, his prospects, if he stays where he is, does he know what he wants to do? If the answer is no, business school is a great place for what I call the elite and the aimless. Does he have the money to pay for it? And does he get into a top 20 school? He has to weigh all of these things and then make a sober decision. What he doesn't want to do is go to graduate school because that's what he's been told he has to do, end up at a mediocre school, paying a premium price, and coming out with not a lot of economic bump and security because it has gotten so expensive. It used to be a no-brainer. You got into business school, you went. It's no longer a no-brainer. You really have to be thoughtful about your position economically and professionally and where you get into school.
Okay, thanks again to Scott Galloway. He was very generous with his time. Remember the book. The book is called Post-Corona: From Crisis to Opportunity. I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay, when we return, we're going to another interview. We'll be right back.
It's the weekend, and that can only mean one thing. You're listening to Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. This may be a first, Mark. This is one program, and we have two business school professors as guests. If you missed any part of our interview with Scott Galloway, just go to the podcast, to Jill on Money, download the podcast, and you will hear it quickly and efficiently. And that's something you should think about anyway, because the podcast is a great way to get our content in a way at a time when you want it. It's a daily podcast, 7 days a week. We answer questions throughout the week. Weekends, we do interviews, but it is just a little bite-sized, 10, 12 minutes. That's it. Mark will basically yanks me off the air, just says, you're done. Okay, now let's get into this hour. This hour, we are broadcasting from Policy Genius Virtual Studios. Policy Genius is the easy way to compare and buy insurance. All you have to do is go to policygenius.com. And we are going to be discussing Edge with a Harvard Business School professor. Her name is Laura Huang. She wrote this book called Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. She is a real powerhouse. Really, essentially, this book is about that your success is about how you gain an edge. And she describes that as the elusive quality that gives you an upper hand and attracts attention and support. So let's hear about it, man. Edge is a good thing. We want you to have an edge. And Laura Huang is going to give us a little bit of her background. And then we'll get into the meat of the book because there's some really cool concepts that you might be able to take away and think about, especially as you're maybe contemplating your career for 2021. Here's our interview with Laura Huang. What is the best career or money decision you've ever made?
Wow, that is a great question. Probably the instances where I've leapt before thinking. I know that sounds wrong in some ways, but there are instances in which I was offered something and I sort of didn't think and just took it. but then I've made it work out. And those have been some of the most rewarding and best career decisions.
All right. So you're very young and you're a Harvard Business School professor. Tell us a little bit of the story of your life. Where'd you come from?
Yeah, so I'm Taiwanese American. So I'm dual Taiwan U.S. citizenship and grew up in New Jersey. So my parents immigrated and couldn't afford anything closer to New York City, to where they needed to be. And so we ended up in this farmland in New Jersey. It was always painfully shy as a child and ended up doing engineering in college. Found out that I was pretty bad at engineering. Got pulled into the business side of things, technical marketing, worked in investment banking, consulting, and finally now I'm a professor. So I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up.
What's it like to be like Harvard Business School professor? Sounds very impressive to someone like me who does not have an MBA, maybe an MBA wannabe. But is it a rarefied environment? How do you feel about that?
It's an amazing environment, but it's also it's a normal environment in lots of different ways. I actually have gotten rejected from Harvard multiple times. I applied to get my MBA at Harvard and was rejected. I applied for a PhD at Harvard and was rejected.
Wait a minute, where'd you get your MBA?
My MBA was at INSEAD, which was in
Paris.
France. Yes, in France and in Singapore. And then my PhD was at UC Irvine. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little bit of, actually the first time I ever stepped foot on Harvard soil was when they invited me to do a research talk, which then led to the job offer. So I had actually not even been to the campus up until the point at which I almost was working there.
And so when did you start working there?
January of 2018.
So are you tenure track?
I am tenure track. So
which means how long?
So I'm an associate professor, which typically at most schools is a tenured position. HBS is one of the only schools that doesn't tenure until you are at the full professor level. So before I was at Harvard, I was at the Wharton School.
I've heard of that at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so I was there for almost 7 years, and I was there as an assistant professor, and that was actually my first academic job.
Why'd you leave Penn?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's just so many people there that I adore, that I miss dearly on a daily basis. This was one of those leap and then think kind of decisions that I talked about. I had not intended to leave Penn at all. Came to do that research talk that I spoke about at HBS, where they just invited me to present my research, do a brown bag, and after that, they called me a couple of weeks later. They called me and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in moving?" And I said, "Moving where?" And they said, "Moving here." And I said, no, I'm actually, we're settled in Philadelphia. We're really happy.
There's a we, so there's a partner.
Yeah. Partner, kids, the whole shebang. We're good. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And then a couple weeks later, they called again and they said, "What would it take to get you to move?"
Did you put a big number out?
Well, I even said something along the lines of, I probably shouldn't have said this to the department chair, but I said something like, "You do realize you've rejected me multiple times. Like, I'm not sloppy seconds here." I don't know if I was thinking that or if I said that out loud.
I love that.
It was something along those lines. But I also at that moment was like, wow, they're really serious about this. And he said to me, the department chair said to me, "Well, why don't you come? Why don't you come visit us?
And what was
spend the day with us?"
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What was the brown bag presentation of research? What was the research?
I was presenting on gut feel and investors. So how angel investors use their gut feel to invest in startup companies. So that was really based on some of my dissertation early research, where I realized that a lot of the decisions that people make, even though they're very analytical in nature, that in fact they're driven by people's intuition, and we really use that gut feel to make sense of that hard data.
in your analysis, did you find that gut feel worked or didn't work?
Yeah, so it's interesting. What I found was that gut feel doesn't work when you're just looking at the aggregate. So if you're thinking in terms of baseball averages, right, you're not going to, be batting 400 or batting 500. But what your gut feel allows you to do is pinpoint the home runs. It allows you to know which investments are going to be absolute dogs and which ones are going to be absolute home runs. And so for angel investors who are investing on this portfolio approach, where really they don't care if 20 or so are absolute losses, but one's a 30x return, it actually works in their benefit. And what happens is that when we don't use our gut feel in these types of high uncertainty, high complexity decisions, we sometimes talk ourselves out of it by finding the data to justify what we really wanted to do anyways. And so that was sort of the power of gut feel for a lot of these investors.
We'll get back to our interview with Laura Huang in just a minute. Hey, I know it's the new year. You got things on your mind. Well, don't you worry. We have answers for you. Send us your financial questions. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Do I invest here? Should I put my money there? Jill Schlesinger can help you. Back to Jill on Money.
You're back. It's Jill on Money, and we are talking to Laura Huang. She's a Harvard Business School professor. She has written a book called Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. And we recorded this before the pandemic, so that's why you're not going to hear any mention of that. She's a real dynamo, and I always find it interesting, even just the choices that she made in her own career. She was a tenured professor at Wharton, and she kind of leapt at the opportunity to go to Harvard Business School. I personally like Philadelphia a lot more than I like Boston, so I think that was probably a bad decision. But you can't just judge based on that, can you? Anyway, in this next part of our interview with Laura, we are discussing leadership. You know, every leader needs to figure out where the edge is. Every leader needs to figure out what it is that's going to motivate the people who you're working with, both up, down, sideways. You got to do a lot of management. So check this out. We're talking leadership with Harvard Business School professor Laura Huang. This is a very sort of back to my sports roots. You know, there are some people who are natural athletes. And so I can teach somebody how to shoot a layup. Mm-hmm. I can teach someone the mechanics behind a beautiful foul shot. But I can't teach someone to be a great basketball player. Mm-hmm. So tell me about how you approach leadership.
Yeah, I mean, it was a question, to be honest, that I also asked myself. I was sort of, even something like entrepreneurship. Can you teach entrepreneurship? Can you teach leadership? So the short answer is yes, because my business card says professor of entrepreneurship and professor of...
Ergo, I agree.
Ergo.
You are an expert.
That's right. But... You know, the thing is, it's very much about building these schemas and these patterns and these mental models. That's really where I think the power of learning and teaching something like leadership and entrepreneurship really exists. It's about this awareness of your own strengths and weaknesses, the types of organizations that you're going to be most optimally a leader for, instances what is the band at which you can operate, where you can be successful or not successful, or brute force it or not. And it's putting yourselves in these situations so that you, in a sense, gain your own intuition, that you don't go in with a situational type of arrogance because you think you've seen it and now you're going to import it into a different industry. It's about being able to sort of build these mental models and going in and sort of acting and reacting and also leading in a way where you think it's intuitive, but it's really based on scenarios that you've talked about and things in the classroom that we've discussed. That's really the power of the classroom, I think, for this. And that's why I think the classroom setting is still so important, to be able to learn and listen from others.
All right, let's talk about the book.
Yeah.
Because I really liked it. I even said to Mark, I'm like, I didn't read that other person's book because I had to read Laura's. So, all right, let's just first define edge, which you say edge is about knowing how, when, and where to put in the effort and hard work. That seems like easy to do, but actually, it's really hard. So can you talk a little bit about identifying edge and how you know when to put that effort into the edge?
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that is very hard, but at first glance, it seems like something very easy. So people are always, oh, you wrote this book. What are the 10 steps that I need to do to gain my edge? And the thing is, what this really is a perspective. It's a perspective on what it means to have an edge. And the more that you make it authentically about you and your strengths and your weaknesses and who you are, the better your ability to actually create and gain that edge for yourself. The premise of it is that we're sort of taught from a really young age that it's about hard work, right? That if you want to be successful and you want to get the right outcomes, put in the hard work, right? You ask super successful people how they made it, and inevitably, hard work will be one of the things that they say.
Yeah, and you know what they always leave out? Good luck.
Yeah.
Luck is good, too.
Exactly. Luck is a huge portion of it. But luck is also things, what we see as luck is also other people having given you opportunities, or having some sort of a privileged background, or luck can be a lot of different things. You know, when we talk about hard work doesn't speak for itself. It sometimes does, but in most instances, hard work doesn't speak for itself.
What do you think about this 10,000 hour thing?
So I think that hard work is critical. And, you know, I think that it's a great way for us to see hard work as something that is very critical. But in my book, I talk about how hard work is something that we talk about first, but in fact, hard work should come last. Because once you understand some of these principles, that's when your hard work works harder for you. And that's where that 10,000 hours of practice ends up making that difference, because you already get that the world is dominated by perceptions and attributions, and that you have the ability to guide those perceptions and attributions so that your 10,000 hours and your hard work will work harder for you.
What amazed me is that when you started that, you said you sort of it requires a pretty brutally honest self-assessment, right?
Totally.
You started talking about your story, your origin story, and you said, I was a bad engineering student, right?
Yeah.
So you could have gritted through. You could have put in all the hard work necessary. What was it about that you could see you weren't going to be a good engineer?
I mean, I gritted it through college in the sense that I started it and I was going to finish with that degree. My dad had given me this piece of advice because I had said, you know, I want to switch majors. And this was really early on. And I said, I want to switch majors. I don't like this. And he said to me, you can absolutely switch majors, but you can't switch unless you know what it is you're switching into, and that you're going to like it more than what you're currently in. It really was sort of one of those things where I was like, okay, I could be doing economics, but then I was like, I would take an economics class and then I was sort of like, yeah, I don't know if I would like this more, or I would take something else. And so I kept pursuing, and I think it was one of those, I just didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. And so I just kind of kept going until I finished. And like I said, I still, to some extent, don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And some of the most interesting people that I've met are people who have had multiple different careers, or have acknowledged that they're not the type of people who are like, I wanted to be a biologist since I was 5 years old and now I will be a biologist. I mean, those are interesting to people too, but it just means that there's lots of different trajectories.
Absolutely. So I love this part of your second chapter. I'm not giving the whole book away. People got to buy the book. Again, the book is called Edge. Your basic goods, kind of like taking your inventory, right? You say that there are two components, essentially, which is you bring value, you enrich what would otherwise be. Second, others think so too. And what I love about this is this nuance where you say you've got to put an and. That's really the very important aspect of this. Like, yeah, you bring value, but if nobody knows you bring value, that's great for you to know,
Yeah.
But who cares? So talk about how you came up with these two components and how you linked them.
That's right. I mean, the question is there an or between those two statements, or is there an and between those two statements? Because the first part of it is knowing how you enrich and provide value. The second part of that is that other people think you enrich and provide value. And there's a lot of people who that you have that or. They only have that second piece. They're really great at managing impressions. They're really great at other people believing that they bring value and that they enrich when they might not. That's really frustrating for a lot of us, especially when we're trying to do both. And it makes a lot of us start to think, we don't want to be that person. We don't want to be managing the impressions of others. We don't want to be strategic and manipulative in that way when we're pretending that we're somebody that we're not. And this actually prevents a lot of people from gaining their edge because they don't want to position themselves in a way that is authentically them, because they're mixing up the fact that guiding and managing people's perceptions can be something that's really authentic. People are going to have a first impression of you, whether or not you give them one or not. And so it's actually much more, it's the opposite of being strategic. It's much more authentic when you guide them to who you actually are. So that first impression is in line with that value you provide so that you can have that richer, deeper interpersonal relationship with the person that you're engaging with.
We'll get back to our interview with Laura Huang in just a moment. Let's think about what you can do during the break. Oh, wait, I know. You can go to our website, jillonmoney.com, and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. See how easy that is? Okay, we'll be right back.
.401ks, IRAs, refinancing, she covers it all. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's Jill on Money, and we're right in the middle of an interview with Professor Laura Huang. I guess I should call her Doctor. I'm really, by the way, that whole squabble around Jill Biden and I don't know if you heard about this, but the Wall Street Journal wrote an op-ed. There was some dude who wrote an op-ed about how Jill Biden, the first lady to be, shouldn't use doctor because it's just a PhD. I tell you what, I'm all for however you want to refer to yourself, that's how I'm going to refer to you. So she wants to use doctor and she wrote that doctorate. I'm calling her doctor. That's how I feel. Also, I don't necessarily just call Dr. So-and-so, even if it's an MD, because if they say, hey, Jill, how you doing? I say, hey, Mark, I'm doing fine. But if it's, well, Ms. Schlesinger, tell me about yourself, I'll say, okay, Dr. So-and-so, tell me about yourself, right? So I kind of think it's reciprocal. I don't just give them that honorarium, okay? That's just my 2 cents. All right, now let's get back to Dr. Laura Huang, who is our guest. She's written a book called Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. This is an interview we recorded before the pandemic, so I want to be clear about that. In this next segment, I think this is a really interesting concept. We talk about that each of us has a weakness. Each of us has something we're not so great at. What Laura is suggesting in this next part of our interview is, how do you own that weakness and what do you do with it? Let me give you an example. I would say that one of my weaknesses is that I can feel like I want to jump out of my skin when people annoy me, and then I get very cranky. And then what I do is I have to own it. And then Mark will say to me, like, you're in a bad mood today. What happened? And I'll say, nothing happened. And then I'll say, oh, wait, something did happen. So what I try to do is not react. And sometimes I could just take it out on Mark and then he'll tell me what I've done right or wrong. Okay, here's more of our interview with Laura Huang. Let us now move on a little bit. You also say knowing your strengths is great. Tell me about how owning your weakness can really change it.
I mean, we all have this highlight reel, right? And we all are sort of presenting this highlight reel of ourselves to other people. But when you really are able to guide and delight others is when you're able to also acknowledge and understand your own weaknesses. There are instances in which you might double down on your strengths and not think about your weaknesses at all. There are other instances where you might want to be working on your weaknesses and make them, elevate them. And there's others where you just want your weaknesses to not be liabilities. Those are really different contexts, and in different industries and in different situations, we need to understand how we're sort of being viewed. I use this analogy as well, how people are like diamonds. And each person, when we say be yourself, it's really kind of bad advice, because there's so many different dimensions to ourselves, including our flaws and our weaknesses. Just like a diamond, there's some angles in which you're going to shine really brightly. There's other angles in which you're not going to shine as brightly, or you're going to have some flaws. And part of it is understanding in which contexts, under what lighting, under what environments, in front of which people, what angles do you want to be showing to shine the brightest, but also understanding that behind it, you're still the same diamond.
You said, early on that sometimes you sort of would leap before you thought it through.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, so as you're talking about the facets, I'm sort of thinking about this idea that a boss taps you on the shoulder and says, Laura, what I really think you should do is this job. And you naturally, because maybe that is your personality, you'll say yes, even though you feel like maybe I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I'm wondering, do you think, if you're presented with that kind of thing, how you can bring that to your whole explanation of like your strengths and your weaknesses, or the facets of the diamond? When do you say, look, I don't think that's in my wheelhouse?
Yeah.
Or do you say, I'll figure it out?
Well, I think part of that leaping is also sometimes leaping to the nose too. Like something doesn't feel right, and I'm like, no, that's just not, even if everyone else is sort of like, like the decision to go to Harvard, there was 90% of people were saying, don't go.
Really?
They said, why would you trade in your Bentley for I don't know, whatever fancy car.
Lamborghini.
They're like, they're both fancy cars. Why would you trade in this to go? You're really
Also,
stable. You know people. You've developed these networks. You've already gotten sort of to some extent that edge or that advantage. Why would you go and start all over? So, but there's these, so sometimes the leaping is just saying, no, it doesn't feel right. And sometimes the leaping is, let me go for it. But I think what's critical in there to sort of answer the how do you make sense of it is you learn and you really understand the facets of your diamond, or you understand your basic goods, when you also have an ability to have humility and embarrass yourself. I've just been so embarrassed in so many different instances, and you have to have a thick skin in that sense, because that's where you learn. And sometimes people learn after one time. Sometimes people learn when they see multiple instances where they've made the same mistakes. And I'm a little dense. Sometimes it takes me 2 or 3 times of being embarrassed in the same way until I get it. And when you're able to sort of do that, I feel like that's when you start to learn really who you are and the ways in which you can enrich and provide value.
I love this part of the book where you said, take your time going from inexperienced to pro. Take the time to master the basics, your own, not those of everyone around you. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it takes time. We're in such a rush to become this person that we see, or a mentor, or some aspirational sort of thing. Someone once said to me, you should never be envious of someone else unless you're willing to trade entire lives and entire experiences with them. Meaning, like, we tend to take one aspect of somebody and say, oh, look how successful they are in their career. But in order to be envious or to want that in the same way, or to be jealous of that person in that way, we have to understand, we have to be willing to assume their personality and their traits and their family and all of those things that they've had to endure and go through as well. And when we think about it that way, it makes it, at least for me, I've been able to be much more at peace with who I am in my own journey, and to take my time in my own journey.
We'll get back to the conclusion of our interview with Laura Huang in just a second. And as always, we have lots of resources on the website. I encourage you to go there, especially if you're interested in some of the details of the newest stimulus plan that was passed. You can check it out. Jill on Money. Click on the resource tab. Okay, we'll be right back.
Follow Jill on Twitter and Instagram for more personal finance content. Just use the handle @JillOnMoney. Now, back to the show.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. And if you've got a financial question, of course, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. But right now, we are about to conclude our interview with Professor Laura Huang. She is a professor at Harvard Business School. She wrote a really interesting book called Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage, and we'll link to that. The last segment, we were talking about owning your weakness. As I was doing the intro to that segment, I said, oh, what I just do is I just, basically take out whatever my weakness is, my perturbedness, and I just, I take it out on Mark, basically. It's like my work spouse. You take it out on your work spouse, right? In this next segment, we actually find out why that's probably not a great idea, because what Laura is talking about in this next segment is making sure that you're not making your own problem someone else's problem. Or as she likes to say, don't make your problem my problem. I like how she says it that way. So here's the conclusion of our interview with Laura Huang. I love the part about you sort of go from academic to like very blunt writing, and I love that. So, and what you do is you translate it. So I think it's so funny. You're talking about framing and identifying symptoms and formulating problems. And you're like, okay, to translate that, don't make your effing problem my effing problem. Now, Can you talk about that? Because that jumped out at me and I just started laughing out loud.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, because we're in this socially interconnected, interpersonal world, not only do we sort of assume the identities of other people and their goals and all of those things, when there's something urgent or when there's something important or when there's a problem, it gets passed off and it bleeds into all of the other lives of that person. And so this friend of mine, Stan Van Bray, once said, to one of his colleagues, don't make your effing problem my effing problem. And he used more colorful language than that. But for the purposes of my audience in the book, I toned it down a little bit. But it's so true. And so I remember that sometimes when there's something, when people are coming at me with urgency, or when people are coming at me with their sort of things, just to remember that their journey doesn't have to be your journey. Mm-hmm. What they care about, some of it will interact with what you care about, but it doesn't have to be that. And just because somebody took one trajectory to get to a place where you want to go doesn't mean you can't get to that exact same place with a different trajectory.
Right. I mean, there are times where people will say to me, I find it interesting, they're like, how do I become a financial journalist? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I didn't do it the way that you would do it.
Right.
So there are a lot of different ways to get there, but I wouldn't say that somebody should sort of aspire to have my zigzag weirdo crazy ass career, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you have been involved with efforts around diversity.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you do say very bluntly that stereotypes always invade our interactions. So can you talk about how we can better manage that?
They do. I mean, from an academic standpoint, stereotypes are a reality and they're actually useful to us because we cognitively can't process all of the information coming to us at the same time. And so from everything from the cereal brands that we like, to the foods that we eat, to the interactions that we have with people, to the places we've been, we use stereotypes, we cluster, we do things to kind of give ourselves shortcuts so that we can manage all of this complexity and uncertainty that we're dealing with on an everyday sort of world. But at the same time, that creates these negative stereotypes as well. We tend to then cluster people and make generalizations as well. And so it's important to kind of understand that from each individual standpoint, that those stereotypes come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. They don't have zero credence, but they also don't have 100% credence in any situation. And so that's the importance of what I talk about as stopping and redirecting, that you need to be able to guide these perceptions of who you are, understanding that people are going to have these stereotypes of you. When you're able to understand not only who you are and who you are based on your background and your experiences, but also start to have this intuition about who your counterpart is and the background that they have and the experiences that they have, and in turn, how they might be perceiving you, vis-a-vis this interaction, that's when you have this power to flip stereotypes around and create your own advantage. Flip it in your favor. You're able to sort of stop and recognize that they might be seeing you in one way and then redirect. So a classic example of this is some that I've seen in multiple studies that I've run and in multiple people that I've had conversations with and heard their stories. Definitely applies to women and minorities, but I've also seen this with people who have accents. And people who have accents are something that's considered a non-traditional American accent. We often think that it's about communication, that they're not able to communicate as well. But in fact, it's not about communication. It's about things like we deem them to be less interpersonally skilled, less likable, less likely to be a team player, all of those sorts of things. And so when you recognize that, when I've had people who have accents go into a job interview, for example, and recognize that they might be seen as someone who is less interpersonally skilled, less willing to work on a team. And then they get asked those typical interview questions, right? Like, tell me about a time when, and then they say things like, they give examples that tell the interviewer about a time where they fought for resources for their team. And they didn't stop until they met the goal and made that sale. They are addressing those very concerns that have to deal with interpersonal influence in a very benign way.
Right, not going like, I know what you're
Yes.
seeing in me, right?
Yeah,
I get that.
Right, it's not like you see that I'm a woman and so then you assume that I'm not going to. Instead, you take those assumptions and you're addressing those assumptions by giving them examples that show them, wow, this person is very interpersonally influential.
Oh, isn't it maddening a tiny bit, though? I know it's the truth.
Yeah.
And so you want to be effective. And I know that's why you wrote the book, but there's a maddening part to this. Okay, don't worry. We are coming back. I'm going to do some financial New Year's resolutions with you guys, okay? So stay tuned. It's Jill on Money. We'll be right back. You're back. It's Jill on Money, and we are broadcasting from the Policy Genius Virtual Studios. Policy Genius. It's the easy way to compare and buy insurance. All you have to do is go to policygenius.com. Very easy, right? Okay, before we finish up, I know it's the new year and you've probably got some resolutions. So I'm going to give you some of my favorite resolutions. I wrote about this. You'll see this on the website. I just think that tracking your money, man, if you didn't figure that out last year, a pandemic can really make it pretty clear to you. So let's all try to track our money. And, if you got a good sense of it, then okay, fine. We also know that without tracking your money, you can't do what I love to call the big three. You can't fund your emergency reserve fund that can cover 6 to 12 months of your living expenses. And you can't reduce your credit card or other high interest debt. And you can't fund your retirement plans. Just can't. Okay. Use technology to help you. As much as I always tell you that I want you to just do all of your estate planning, for God's sakes already, please just do it. Even if you don't do it, what about if you just check out your beneficiary designations? Maybe that will just do it for you. I like to call changing or checking your beneficiary designations as the gateway drug of estate planning. So try to check that out. Okay, so this is our New Year's message to you. We want to thank you so much for listening. You guys make this show fantastic. You really do. You listen attentively. You send us great questions. And we're grateful for that. So Mark and I want to thank you right now for all of your support. And we are here for you. So if you want to send us your resolution or you want to just ask us a financial question, ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. So thanks to all of our guests throughout the year. It's been great. Thanks to Joel Goodman. He's the guy who composes our music. A little special shout out to Mark Talercio, who is much more than my executive producer. He is my partner in crime. He makes this all possible. Truly. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mark, I love you. And thanks to everyone being as safe as possible, okay? So as always, we'll just finish with wash your hands, wear your masks, maintain your physical distancing, and try to put your hands metaphorically on someone's back. It will help them. It will make you feel better. We're in this together. We've got a few more months of this, but we're going to get through it. So thanks again to everyone. Happy New Year. We'll talk to you next week.